to Barnabas Junction. In this video I'm going to be showing you and giving you the details about this control panel. I'm in the process of converting the points on the layout to motorized, and for that we needed this control panel. It's relatively been simple to construct. It's only here as a temporary measure. It's secured to the layout at the moment to make it easier to operate. Now, if anyone wants to know the measurements of this, it's 34 inches long and 9 inches wide. That's allowed for the fitting of full A4 sheets for the track plan diagram to be printed on, laminated and then stuck onto the backboard. The board itself is constructed using this 5.5mm hardwood ply, and I bought a relatively biggish sheet. I think it was about 5 foot long, 4 foot long, something like that, and about 3 foot wide, and it only cost me about £8, I think it was, something like that, £5, £8. The edging of the construction, I wanted it to be very sturdy, very strong, and also I wanted it to have quite some depth. Now, I did think of having some thin strips of wood, excuse me. I thought the ability to bend and twist that might be make it a bit less sturdy. So what I went with was some of this. Now this is the wood that I'm going to be using to actually strengthen the layout eventually, but I thought I've got some offcuts, and I thought I'd use those offcuts to make this. So we've got two 34-inch lengths, top and bottom, and then in between some 7-inch lengths to fit in between, and then the panel, the ply panel, sat on top. I then printed this track plan out, courtesy of Penny Hill Junction. Designed it to match the layout. The centre area here is of the station, and then we've got the top area, as I've called north, and the bottom area, which I've classed as south. Those are the two side areas either end of the station. Those were printed out and then laminated, and then they were stuck down with permanent adhesive spray. I did think about gluing it, but I think the spray gave a better coating. It was then finished off around the edge to tidy nice and tidy and give it a bit of protective depth against things getting knocked against the switches, with some edge trim. I think this was the most expensive stuff actually out of everything. This was purchased from the local DIY store as well, and I think it was a 8-foot length, and that cost about £6, I think, and that's all that's left of it. So that was tacked onto the edge around each of the sheets. Then we looked at where the points were going to be going and drilled out, I think it was a 5.5mm drill bit, or maybe a 6, I think it was a 5.5, for the switches, as we have here. There's only 6 switches at the moment, but I do have the rest of the switches to go in here. These are from Micro Miniatures. These are momentary switches on-off on, and they are to go in to fill the remaining ones, which are already cut out, they're drilled out, sorry, ready for the switches to go in. I have already got one of these switches live, but prior to waiting for the new switches to arrive, I have already been doing some of the wiring behind. So I'll pause this and take this off and show you what we've got behind. Okay, there we go. We have now the panel turned around, and as you can see, there is some wiring now taking place inside. The wiring is relatively simple to do, and I'll take you in for a closer look in a moment of the wiring setup. But I'll just explain, we have block connectors on the tops for the wires to attach. These block connector here is for the wires for the switches here, and those for the switches there. This nice long one here is for all the switches within this area here. And then we've got a separate little block connector here for the return loop to the CDUs. So I'll take you in for a closer look now of the wiring. Okay, so here we are now taking a bit of a closer look, and as you can see, you can visually see the switches, which are all lined up. This is the exact way round. This is the station section. As you see, I've got a couple of switches there yet to go in, but I'll show you what I've done, and this will be exactly the same way the rest of them will be fitted on here. This switch here is currently powering my very first point motor, which I have fitted. More about that in a moment. As you'll see, the center wire, that is the common return, and I have looped those across all the switches and round to here, and then that then comes to this block connector here, which then this goes off to the CDU, which is currently down there. It will be placed under the layout eventually. Then we do have then the individual switch lives to go to the point motor. As with this, the switch will go one way and activate the live feed on one wire, or the other way will activate the live feed on the other way. Both the two wires then come up into block connector like so, and so that I can have this panel removable, so I can take it away from the layout. They all then come into these block connectors, and then the two separate wires to the point motor come out and go underneath the layout. Okay, so I'm going to be adding these two switches in here. We already have the common loop to go to those switches, so I'll get on with adding these switches. Here they are. Now the switches themselves are relatively easy to work with. They come with washers, nuts, and I think I paid about £1.10 plus VAT for each of these switches. So what we do, we need to take off all the nuts and bolts that are already on. All the nuts and washers apart. Leaving the very bottom nut on, as what I have found, if you take off that one, when tightening the nuts from above, it pulls on the whole stem of the top of the switch and will actually pull it out of the unit, thus damaging the point. I have had this once happen when doing the first, but luckily I managed to put it back together and not damage the switch. So I'm going to prepare the board and get the switches in. just had to drill those out a little bit, as the original drill hole was not quite big enough. So that's now a 6mm, and that now fits in nicely. We just need to countersink the hole slightly to allow the stem of the screw to fit down, as we're keeping the actual screw, I have already mentioned, on the nut, on the thread. So we just need to keep measuring that until we get the countersink down enough to allow the thread of the end of the screw to pop through. So I'll just go do that. There we go. Right, there we go. That should now fit. There we go. Here it just clicked through. Yeah, we've got plenty of thread there now. All we now need to do is put the screw on the opposite side, like so. And with an 8mm socket, just tighten that up, making sure that the switch is totally straight. And that's it. That's that one. So I'll do the other one now, quickly. And there we go. 2 more switches added in to the panel. And we'll get the rest of the switches in now, and then we'll come back and we'll show you the wiring behind. Okay, right, welcome back. All the switches are now in place and they all work. All lined up right. So, pleased with them. Had one little incident with this one here, where the wood, must have been a knot in the wood and it cracked the wood. So I just used one of the little washers that came with it just to hold it in a larger area. And I actually quite like how the washer's gone on, so I might look at putting the washers behind all the others just to give them a little bit extra strength on the panel. But all in all, looking good. Very pleased how it's gone. So now we're going to get on and wire up those switches. So let's get it spun round and I'll show you how each wire is connected up. Okay, so here we are now at the switches. As you'll see, we've got some switches here that have already been wired up, 6 in total. And these are the 2 left for the station area, which are yet to be wired. Now, the centre one is the common return back to the CDU, and these can be daisy chained together, as I have already done with these 6, and you can see there the black line, the black wire, is looped between each of them. Now, some of you might say to put heat shrink on. Well, I did attempt that at the very beginning, but it became a little bit difficult as these pins are very close together, and adding multiple bits of wire, I found the heat shrinking, once you put it on, you can't get it off if you need to, if there's a problem. So I haven't actually heat shrinking them at the moment. I may do that again in the future. Just looking at that one's quite a bit closer. I'll just tidy that one up as well, because we don't want those two to contact, otherwise they will trip the point without making any contact with the switch, if you know what I mean. So what we need to do now is we need to connect these 2 up. For that, we have the wire here, which loops from that bottom one there. I'm going to loop that to there, and then loop that to there. and then we'll be adding then the switch wires, the red ones, which will then come to the block connector, and then go off to the point itself. So I'm just waiting now for the soldering iron to heat up. It shouldn't take long. In the meantime, we will process in getting the wire sorted for the loop. So cut that off. There we go. And the piece that we cut off, we're going to strip the end of that. And then twist those together. So we get a join like so. Before we attach, we're going to tin that. Okay, let's check the soldering iron. It's nearly ready. Always make sure your soldering tip is nice and clean. And let's see. Yes, we're ready. So we'll now tin that wire. Simple as that. Okay, we will now also add a little tiny bit of solder to the peg, and we'll do them all actually while we're here in preparation for the other wires. I'm using pre-fluxed solder, so no flux required. Okay, so now all we need to do is connect that wire up. What we'll do is, just to ensure we don't have too much bare wire, we'll just trim a little bit off there, just so it's a little tiny bit shorter. This is where more than one pair of hands does come in handy. So heat it up enough just to stick that wire tip. Like so. Make sure that's solid. Yep, that's solid. There we go. And now loop that onto that centre wire. Like so. I'll just trim that little bit off there. There we go. That's now nice and neat. All we need to do now is add the switch wires from there to the block connector, like shown here. We already have 2 empty slots ready for those wires to go in. So that's all the wires attached to the switches, and we'll now attach those to the block connectors. So I'll get that done and then come straight back to you. Okay, and there we are. The final 2 switches are now fully wired up. What I did do is the switches that were there were originally in there. I've just moved those wires over to correspond to those ones, and those 2 are now in here. Wiring is all nice and neatly tucked in, and that is now the whole of the station area all switched, all powered by the switch. Here then, as you see here, this goes to a point motor. Each one of these will then have wire going off from here in a loom up to the baseboard and then off to their corresponding point motors. So there you go. That's how that's been done. Just turn that back over and you can see the switch panel. I'll place it up there. There we go. And all switches are in. I'm very pleased with it indeed. That is the working one. I'll just show you that. There we go. So there we have successful switches for the point motors installed in the panel. I'll leave that there for now and we'll do the point motors connecting up in part 2. Thanks for watching. See you next time.